Do you feel more like a referee than a parent? Then you've got kids that don't get along. Hi, I'm Dr. Roseann, and this is part of our Behavior Decoded series. We're talking about bickering siblings. How do you stop nonstop fighting when you feel like a referee? Who hasn't been there? Who has siblings yourself or who has children who don't get along and it's an icky feeling when you're bickering a lot, but most of the time kids have conflict and get over it, but sometimes kids are too similar, too different, there's a temperament issue and they just don't get along. And it's hard as parents to watch that because we think, wow, we wanted to have more than one kid. So they always had a friend. But then, it's a WWE SmackDown every time they're together. And you're literally, trying to referee them. So why does bickering and fighting happen, right? So I mentioned temperament, differences in personality. That's true and that's real. And sometimes we need to be there to better support our kids who just are different human beings. And we're going to talk a little bit about communication. Sometimes it's a need for personal space, right? I think we all have a kid who doesn't really get personal space and it can be really annoying. I can tell you that, on a personal level, that's probably the number one reason why my kids don't get along. I have one kid who is what we call a space invader and another kid who's like now a teenager and really can't stand it and wants personal space and communicates that and it isn't respected. So when you have one child who doesn't have personal space, right? You depending on their age, you want to talk about it through social stories. You want to support them. You want to have them understand perspective taking. But ultimately, that child probably has sensory needs, regardless of their age. And so, one of the best tips you can do is provide sensory activities for both the kids, but certainly for the child, regardless of their age. I mean, I have an older kid who really doesn't respect personal space boundaries. So it comes and goes. We set the expectation in advance. Always the case with siblings, right? You always want to let your kids know. Don't assume that your kids know what you're doing because you've done it 10 times. Let them know in advance, right? We went to something recently and I was like, "Okay, we're gonna be around a bunch of people we don't know." And for both my kids, um, they're quiet around kids they don't know. And so we went over sort of like the game plan and whatnot. Now, again, that's a different situation, but when it comes to kids that, there's a behavioral breakdown, we wanna make sure we're clear what the boundaries are, the expectations, not the threats, but what the expectations are, talk through what some of the, outcomes can be, what do they need to do? Okay. So kids can bicker because of attention and competition. I mean, it's real, right? I have recently worked with somebody where, the kid was like literally said, "I'm going to get attention any way I can." And they have a sibling who's incredibly dysregulated. So they have figured out at a subconscious level, now it's conscious, that I'm going to get attention any way I can. So it's very hard. I know many, the average, what is it, like 2.2 is the amount of kids most people have. But, I was just at my Christian homeschoolers conference and there were so many people that had 5, 6, 7, 8 kids. God bless, honestly. I don't know how they do it. And it's pretty incredible to know that um, you know, that there's people that, still have so many kids. My number one question is, "What are you driving?" Right? Got a Sprinter van. So attention and competition, how do we diffuse that, right? So we wanna be careful what kinds of attention. We don't wanna accidentally reinforce, negative attention, right? So your kids, don't do that, right? The negative components, like So we wanna reinforce the behaviors we want. We wanna try to display the behaviors, and for that child or those kids that are really struggling, we don't wanna just say, "Good job." We wanna actually tell them, like, "Wow, I really loved how you and your brother played with the cat today," right? Or, you know, took turns during this game, whatever it is, right? So I think sometimes there's a real lack of understanding of differences between siblings, right? So that goes back to the differences in personality and temperament. And with one quarter of adults having neurodivergence, it's a whole lot more with kids. So 50% of kids have a physical or mental health problem. You're gonna get 2 kids, one of them gonna have some people. Don't think that it's not the case. You're already listening, you know. So, how do you help your kids understand their autistic brother or, their brother with learning differences who gets really angry every time you do homework or whatever it is? And it's really frank conversations about brain differences, highlight all the differences that you have as family members, and you don't have to talk about it in a negative way, but we have to let our kids know and have empathy for others. And a lack of empathy is something it's on the rise. And our best leaders have empathetic understanding, right? And have a high EQ. And so they don't understand differences. And sometimes families are afraid to talk about it. And I'm always astounded by that, especially when it's an invisible disability like a dyslexia or an anxiety and OCD. Trust me, there's n that kid knows about it, the whole family knows about it, they wind up using negative words, so talk about it. So, some of our kids have really poor conflict resolution skills, and you have to say, "What am I showing at home? Are mom and dad, are we, at odds?" Right? I recently was at a party and a couple was talking to me, and when the wife walked away, the dad said, "Okay, your my wife doesn't believe in any of these natural things." And I was like, "Well, I knew that." And he was like, "You did?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah." I mean, her body language was like, "Who is this lady?" And he kept saying she wants science-backed solutions, and I was like, "Well, that's my work." And, I was like, "Look, I'm here at a party, like, listen to the show, listen to the episode on how to convince your spouse." But the point of this is that, our body language and what we're doing in the household, maybe you're showing conflict, right? Like 80% of my parents about what the problem is. Maybe you're having conflict, about if this behavior's on purpose and whatnot. And so those kids are just role playing what they see. And I don't mean that in any negative way. That's just an enlightenment period. When we know better, we can do better, right? So okay, a lack of communication skills. So this is a big one, and this is why this is last. So just like my boys get into regular fights, they are different human beings. And so their temperament is very different. They do enjoy many of the same things, but they now are at a place where they one used to have good communication skills and the other didn't. And they really get frustrated. So I have to constantly do, sideline coaching, right? On how are we going to talk about this? What are we going to do? And there are times just because your kid is older, or maybe your kids are, 4 and 5, your kids aren't just going to learn these things. You have to be there. You have to be in the trenches. And if you have a neurodivergent kid, I always used to say you got to be a parent whisperer. For many years, for 5 years, we had pool parties every Friday at 11:30 AM at my house, and, it was just amazing to me, like and they were all, like, neurodivergent, so this is, like, in the heyday of our homeschooling, and, you know, people just would, like, leave their kids there and think, "Oh, they're just gonna figure it out," and I was like, "Oh, no," and I had this one lady, like, she would just deny that her kids had some serious problems, and, number one reason for homeschooling is religion, and number two is because there's a problem, and most of them know, and they're there because they wanna be in charge of their education, which is what I did. Um, and, but some of them, it's like, "No, this is we're just not even gonna acknowledge it," right? And so when it comes to social, unlike academic, it's even more that. So these kids were like they would just start trouble, start trouble, start trouble. And I was like, look, you're coming to my house. I cannot be there moderating your kids. If you can't be there moderating your kids, you can't come here. Oh, she got herself mad. And everybody was talking about it. I can't stand it. I don't want to come if they're here. And I tried all these things and she broke up with me and that's okay because then we all got along. But the sad part about it is these kids lacked communication skills. They didn't know how to interact with others. And clearly, mom's role modeling poor communication. And know that I did it in a very lovely, lovely way. There was like a ramp up and not everybody's at the place where they can hear it. And these were younger kids. But we can foster our communication skills and getting down there, being a parent whisperer, helping them coach and navigate through those difficult situations when it's a teenager is the same. It's just know that your teenager developmentally isn't going to want to talk to you about it. So, how do you get them to talk, right? Obviously if you're there, you can try to coach them. You can do preview talk. You can do a dissection after, but they're only going to talk to teenagers if you spend time with them. They're not going to just be like, hey. I mean, when your kids are little, it's like, boy, will they ever shut up? And then when they're older, you're like, are they ever going to talk? Right. And I'm joking, but I'm not because this happens a lot. So when it comes to siblings, think about it. Remember, cool down, never go in hot, as I like to say, and look at it from that aerial view. Take a 360, right? Why is this happening? What do I need to do to support it? Is it temperament? Is it communication? Is not understanding differences? Is there do they lack conflict resolution skills? What do I need to help them get through this? You're not going to wish it away. You're not going to say, I find myself saying, you only have each other. It's not gonna magically happen. It's good to remind him that. Like, I'm like, "You 2 are getting along. This ain't gonna be no Italian brothers not talking, okay?" And it's important to let them know what your boundaries are, but in all seriousness, these are skills that can be taught. Don't feel like it's a waste of time or it's never gonna happen. You might have to be the sideline coach, but you got this.